Cold air lay thin over the mesquite flats below the Santa Ritas when John Ward's stepson led 2 horses toward water and did not return. Hoof marks ran into rough ground and vanished where basalt breaks the soil into scales. At first light, the neighbors rode a widening circle and found a churn of tracks that said raiders had come quick, taken the boy, and ridden for the hills. Ward rode to Fort Buchanan with a rage a man has when the world takes a child by the collar and does not turn around. Lieutenant George Nicholas Bascom read the complaint with a cadet's certainty. A child gone, Apache sign, pursue, pressure, recover. He had never fought the Chiricahua. He had read about them, about Cochise, who moved his people between the dragoons and the Chiricahuas, like a hawk using 2 thermals. About a frontier where raiding and bargaining lived in a tense handshake. Bascom preferred straight lines. He led 60 men toward the Butterfield Station at Apache Pass in January 1861 and sent word into the hills for Cochise to come under a flag and talk. Cochise came. He walked with the easy economy of a man born to rock and distance. With him came his wife, a small son, and several kin. They entered the canvas light of Bascom's tent and sat cross-legged on blankets. Bascom spoke in the grammar of orders. The boy must be returned, the guilty delivered. Cochise answered that the child had been taken near Sonoita by other Apaches, most likely Pinals, that he would search and make restitution if allowed time. He offered animals to ride the trail, pledged to bring the boy or the takers, and asked that his family be allowed to go back with him. His words were plain, his pride unbent. Bascom had decided before the answers. He signaled. Bayonets lifted. Soldiers stepped close. He told Cochise he would be held as a hostage until the boy came back. For a heartbeat, the tent was nothing but breath. Then, Cochise did a small, clean thing. He cut the canvas with his knife and slid through it like a fish through a net. Gunfire snapped. His brother and 2 relatives were seized. His wife and child were grabbed outside. The white flag still hung where it had been tied. That night, the hills glowed with cookfires that did not belong to the army. Cochise took hostages of his own. Stage employees, a stock tender, travelers, men who had as much to do with policy as fence posts do with weather. He sent word. Exchange. Bascom refused. He wanted the missing child, not strangers for kin. Between those 2 certainties lay the graves of a decade. The stage road shivered with rumor. Riders scanned every ridge for silhouettes that might be men, might be saguaro. For days, the would-be parley turned into a ceremony of misreading. Cochise showed himself on a ridge and called down the terms he thought honorable. Release my family, and I will find the abductors, trade hostages, and we both go in peace. Bascom, stiff with duty and watched by his own men, held to the line that a United States officer does not bargain with thieves. Each sunrise salted the ground with more tracks as small Apache parties tested the station's perimeter. A mail coach blundered into a kill zone and lurched out stripped of animals, the coach body punched full of daylight. A detachment riding for water took arrows from the rocks and came back on foot, thorns and blood in their stockings. Then there was blood no letter could recall. Bascom hanged 2 Mexicans he accused of scouting for the Apaches and warned he would hang more. Cochise killed some of his captives in reply and let others live long enough to carry fear. He cut loose a man to tell how it felt to kneel with a rope near his ear. Women in the valleys learned to pack a house in 10 minutes. Men slept with boots on. The road that had promised timetables now kept time by gallop. What Bascom did not know, what the record later conceded, was that the abducted boy almost certainly had been taken by Pinals in a raid unrelated to Cochise. To Bascom, the word Apache was a single badge. To Cochise, it was a braid of bands and obligations. The difference made a noose. Once the canvas split, the argument stopped belonging to facts and belonged instead to pride, fear, and the cold arithmetic of revenge. Spring turned, and the war widened. Cochise struck along the line, mails, ranches, thin patrols, appearing and vanishing like weather. Bascom's command found bodies and the quiet that follows the taking of bodies. Reinforcements came poorly, if at all. The nation had other business at Sumter and beyond. On the Arizona ground, the flag changed and the meanings with it. Some companies went east. Civilians learned that a stagecoach is a fort with wheels only until the team is cut loose. Years pulled other names into the story. Lieutenant Thomas Roberts hauled a mountain howitzer through Apache Pass and learned what rock can do for a small gun. Officers tried diplomacy with whiskey, threats, and patience that snapped whenever a patrol came home one man short. Peace commissioners wrote letters that sounded like sermons to people who preferred proofs. The Butterfield line died. The road stayed like a stubborn scar across the basin. The missing boy grew into another name, Mickey Free, raised among Apaches and later wearing an Army Scout's hat, living proof of how captivity can rotate into allegiance. In 1872, a different grammar entered the canvas. General Oliver Otis Howard came to Cochise not only with troops, but with a civilian intermediary who could travel unarmed and keep his word, a telegrapher turned messenger named Tom Jeffords. Jeffords had ridden where soldiers would not, carrying nothing but nerve and the memory of promises that had not been spoken through clenched teeth. In the Dragoons, they cut a treaty that felt, for once, like it might outlast a season. A reservation was marked where Cochise wanted it, and for several years the line between raid and peace blurred into a tense quiet that passed for hope. But the Bascom Affair did not disappear. It became a layer in the land's geology, a seam of memory you can read after rain has planed the wash walls smooth. Stage drivers remembered the siege not as a chapter, but as a smell, the mixed breath of mules and men waiting under bad news. Settlers told their children in low voices why you never trust a flag unless both hands are empty. Old men in Tucson pointed two fingers at the Dragoons and said Bascom, like a diagnosis. Soldiers learned the hard lesson engineers would later codify. If you tie a problem to pride, it will hold fast through every season. Cochise died of illness, not bullets, with his people around him in the granite folds of his choosing, buried in a place the hills keep. Bascom fell in the Civil War, the weight of other names on his tongue. The Apache War ran on through other leaders, other misreadings, other mornings when a boy did not come back with the horses. The ledger the frontier kept was not one of guilt alone, but of consequence. The price paid when a young officer mistook one nation for many, and a chief mistook one officer's promise for the policy of a country. Stand in Apache Pass on a windless morning, and you can hear the old arithmetic working itself. Boots on gravel, a cavalry sergeant counting heads, a quiet voice in a tongue the army never learned well enough to bargain in. The tent is gone. The station is ruin across the wash. Mesquite has taken back its edges. But the story remains because the country still knows how to stage a misunderstanding and make it permanent. A missing boy, a bungled parley, and a knife that opened canvas. Those were the first lines of a decade of war. What followed belonged to everyone who rode that road or slept within earshot of it. To tell it clean is not to excuse it, only to remember how quickly certainty turns to ash when pressed to another certainty. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.